Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Enthusiasm can be a great attribute, but it can also get you into trouble, especially if your excitement causes you to step out of the will of God. That's what happened to David, and we read about it in 2 Samuel 6, verses 1 through 11. It seems that David was so pumped about his new capital of Jerusalem that he wanted to move the Ark of the Covenant there as soon as possible. But in his excitement, he got in such a hurry that he failed to do things according to God's standards. And his overzealousness had some deadly ramifications. David's heart was in the right place. He was well intended. But disobedience is disobedience. And being in a hurry to honor God is no excuse for disobeying Him. David was in a position that came with huge responsibilities. He was God's shepherd over the entire flock of Israel, and his sins carried corporate weight. As king, when David sinned, everyone suffered, and even zeal for God was not an excuse. David had a heart for God. He was anxious to serve God well and rule according to the will of God. As we saw in the last chapter, David sought God's counsel before doing battle with the Philistines, and the result was a stunning and decisive victory. And as David began to plan and prepare for his future kingdom, including the creation of his new capital in Jerusalem, he was motivated by a strong desire to acknowledge God in all that he did. And one of the first decisions he made was to relocate the Ark of the Covenant from its place in Kiriath-Jearim to the city of Jerusalem. The Ark was an important part of the history of the Jews. It was their link all the way back to the days of Moses and the period of the Exodus. The book of Hebrews provides us with some details regarding this holy and revered object, describing it as covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Hebrews 9, verse 4. The cover of the ark was called the mercy seat, and it was there that God's presence dwelt. Exodus records God's commands concerning the mercy seat. And you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony. Exodus 25, verses 21 through 22. The mercy seat was especially significant to the Jewish people because it was there, once a year on the Day of Atonement, that the high priest would sprinkle the blood of a bull and a goat as an offering to God for the sins of the people. So you can see why David was anxious to have the Ark of the Covenant relocated into his newly chosen capital. But in his zeal to do the right thing, David ended up doing the wrong thing. He got in a hurry and failed to do his homework, and his actions would result in the unnecessary death of Uzzah. In his letter to the Romans, Paul discusses the Jews of his day who suffered from zeal without knowledge. Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God, and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. Romans 10, verses 1 through 3. Paul was talking about his fellow Jews who had refused to accept Jesus as their Messiah. In their zeal for God, they had failed to recognize the very one sent to them by God. Instead, they continued to seek a right standing with God through keeping of the law. They were zealous for God, but were refusing to do things God's way. And that was David's problem. God had given very clear instructions regarding the ark and how it was to be transported. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp sets out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these. But they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. These are the things of the tent of meeting that the sons of Kohath are to carry. Numbers 4, verse 15. The ark was designed by God in a very specific manner, and it had 2 long poles with which it was to be carried, and only by the sons of Kohath. Because of the holiness of the ark, it was forbidden for anyone to touch it. If they did, they would die. No one was to look inside the ark. Again, if they did, they would die. So when David got ready to move the ark, he made a major mistake. Rather than doing things God's way, he followed the lead of the Philistines. In other words, he did it the world's way. Earlier on in the history of Israel, there had been an occasion when the ark had been captured by the Philistines after a battle with the Israelites. How did this happen? The Philistines had defeated the Israelites in battle, and as a result, the elders of Israel resorted to sending for the ark and attempting to use it as some kind of a good luck token. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." 1 Samuel 4, verse 3. But rather than bringing the Israelites victory, the ark was captured by the Philistines. And when they discovered that having the ark of God around proved to be deadly, they decided to return it to the Israelites. And not knowing the law of God, they did so according to their own methodology. "Now then, take and prepare a new cart, and 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke. And yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home, away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its sides the figures of gold, which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way." 1 Samuel 6, verses 7 through 8. So when David got ready to transport the ark into Jerusalem, rather than doing so according to God's prescribed methods, he followed the lead of the Philistines. The passage clearly states, "And they carried the ark of God on a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on a hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark." 2 Samuel 6, verses 3 through 4. And when the oxen pulling the cart stumbled, as the ark began to fall, Uzzah reached out and tried to steady it with his hand. He touched the ark, and he died. In fact, the passage tells us, "And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error. And he died there beside the ark of God." 2 Samuel 6, verse 7. This might appear to us as a gross overreaction on God's part. How could he be so angry against Uzzah for simply attempting to keep the ark from falling? But God's anger is always a righteous and just anger. It's never capricious or without warrant. Uzzah had broken the law of God, and as a result, encountered the righteous and just anger of God. Had God not punished Uzzah for his sin, God would have failed to be God. He would have been unjust. Had God not responded in anger toward the violation of his just law, he would have been an unjust God. This is why God gave clear conditions and commands regarding his people and their interactions with him. Had David done things according to God's plan, this would not have happened. Uzzah would not have died. And while his sin was not motivated by a heart of rebellion, it was rebellion nonetheless, and the outcome was death. And David's reaction to this event was much like ours would be. He became angry. He was frustrated. Then his anger turned to fear, and that fear ended up paralyzing him into inaction. Rather than taking the time to determine what it was that he had done wrong, he simply left the ark where it was. His intentions had been proper and right, but when he suffered for doing God's will in the wrong way, David just gave up. So the ark sat in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, for 3 months. David returned to Jerusalem angry at God and without the presence of the ark in his new capital. But while David pouted, God was busy blessing Obed-Edom. And news of this would reach David, motivating him into action. The problem was not David's zeal, it was his methodology. It was also his lack of knowledge regarding the will of God. He attempted to do the right thing in the wrong way. He acted with sincerity, but in ignorance. He had celebrated, danced, and sang as he led the procession with the ark toward Jerusalem. He had been enthusiastic and excited about having the ark in his new capital. But he had left out one important part: obedience. As Samuel had told King Saul years earlier, God prefers obedience to enthusiastic sacrifice any day of the week. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. 1 Samuel 15, verses 22 through 23.